The artist is a man who finds that the form or shape of things externally corresponds in some strange way to the movements of his mental and emotional life. Author, artist, composer, musician, Graham Collier. This is The Artful Painter. Art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love arts. Nancy Tankersley approaches painting with experimentation and curiosity. The results are impressionistic paintings that are not so much about the subject as it is about the shapes. Her fascination with shapes perhaps began when she excelled in geometry in school. She began her painting career as a portrait painter. However, Nancy's inquisitive and experimental nature compelled her to branch out. Today, she finds beautiful shapes to paint in the landscape, the figure, and still life. She uses non-traditional tools, supports, and technology to express her impressionistic style. When Nancy and her husband moved to Easton, Maryland several years ago, she founded her own gallery and co-founded Easton Plein Air, considered one of the premier annual plein air events in the world. Today, Nancy enjoys the rhythm of teaching, working in her studio, and painting outside. Nancy is also one of 3 judges invited to the 6th annual Olmsted Plein Air Invitational, serving alongside Leslie Lobel and Chris Garvin. In this episode, she candidly talks about the judging process and offers helpful advice to artists who participate in competitions. Nancy talks about the importance of getting to know who you are as an artist. She explains that experimentation is the key to the growth of an artist, a quest she herself continues to this day. Nancy Tankersley's paintings today expressively convey feeling, each securely anchored by the rich, beautiful poetry of the underlying geometry of shapes. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Nancy, is so good to have you on The Artful Painter today. I know you have a busy schedule with all that's going on in the world right now.
Well, yes, I sort of do. It's funny that I feel busier than I did 2 months ago. And I think it's because now I think I have the time to do all those things that I was putting off. And I'm actually doing them. So I actually do have a busy schedule right now.
Isn't that ironic? I really get annoyed a little bit when I hear people say, "Oh, they're so bored" and all that. I'm saying, how can you be bored? There's so much to do right now.
I know. There's so much on the internet that I feel like I'm missing out on. There's just so many opportunities to take advantage of.
And here you are on The Artful Painter producing even more content. So that's good.
Here I am. I'm pleased to be here.
That's one of my challenges is having producing content. It prevents me from consuming a lot of content because it takes a lot of time to produce these things. But it's nice to be able to do it when I can.
Yeah, if you're not driven by a schedule and can do it when you can, I think that's key. As long as you don't neglect your own painting. It's a great thing for you to do. One
of the things that I enjoy about this is I get to meet many different people such as yourself, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. One of the things that brought us together was the fact that you're one of the co-founders of the historic and probably premier plein air event there at Easton, and you were selected as one of the award judges for the 6th annual Olmsted Plein Air event here in Atlanta, which, like many of these events, have been affected. They've been curtailed. Some have been canceled. Others are having to reinvent themselves, and that's what Lillian Ansley and the board for Olmsted are doing. They're going through a process of reinventing how they present the Olmsted event and connect artists and collectors and people who love art together. And you're part of that. You're one of the judges for that event.
Yes, I am honored to be chosen. I participated in it for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed it. Great group of people to work with, and Atlanta is an incredible place to paint. But then my schedule got so hectic, and I'm not 30 years old, in case you didn't know that. And I decided I really needed to balance my studio time more and do fewer events as a participating artist.
Well, yeah, I can understand. I don't paint outdoors as much as I'd like. A number of people that's been on the show are very avid plein air painters. They like to go out and paint outdoors. And sometimes it's their main way of doing it, but it's not I can't do it. It's just not practical, but I do love it when I get to do it.
I do too. It's exactly the same. That's why I always do plein air Easton. And it's like the whole week that I'm doing it, I'm thinking, why am I not doing this all year long? But then I get back into my routine in the studio. And I think, plein air it's a wonderful experience. And it's a great way to gather information. But in the studio, I think, is where the real creativity happens. And I'm at my stage in my career that I'm more interested in that than I am going out and gathering information. So it's just, it's a different stage.
Well, I think that's the beauty of making art, is there's so many different ways and places to experience it, to do it, to make it. It's just, we have options, and that's good.
We do. We have options, and I think you realize at some point that you can't do it all, and you have to also have focus. So you have to get to know yourself as a painter and understand, how you produce your best work. It's a process. It took me a while to get to the point where I actually think I am at a point now where I understand what I need as an artist, as far as input and how much social interaction I need with other artists and how much alone time I need. And that's for now. It may change. Next year I may have a totally different feeling. But right now I'm enjoying the rhythm of teaching and working in my studio and painting outside occasionally. And it's all working for me right now.
Your life has cadence, a nice cadence to it.
Feels like it. And I'm so lucky that my teaching has been curtailed, of course, but I can still go to my studio every day, and I can even step outside and paint plein air. So it's still got a nice rhythm.
Nancy, as one of the founders of the Easton Plein Air event, you've seen the rise in popularity of plein air events throughout the last several years, and I think it's been fun to see that. I've enjoyed going to the Olmsted event here in Atlanta, but now we have this pandemic that has just ripped our souls out, as it were, and it's changed everything. So what are some of the things that you're seeing happening with plein air events? Some that are adapting, and some that I imagine some have just totally shut down. I don't know, but what do you see happening?
Yeah, I don't know of any that totally shut down. I know one that has moved from May to October. And of course, Atlanta is trying very hard to be creative and have an online event. It will not be strictly plein air, I think, because that's certainly difficult to pull off, in the month of April. But they will have an event so that I think their main concern is to help the artists continue in their livelihood. And, I find it very generous and very heartening that they're working so hard to make that happen, to make those sales happen. I think as the months go on, other events will have to do the same thing. I know that Plein Air Easton right now we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to actually be able to have an event here, or if it would be an event with different parameters where the public and the artists are, separated by physical distance. That's something that I think they're waiting to make decisions now. I'm always an optimist. I always like to think that when we come out of this, we'll be even better than, the events were. But it's hard to know. It's just hard to know. We have the advantage of we're outside. We can physically distance people. We can even have the artists painting outside, and the public seeing us after we get through this most severe part of the pandemic. And then maybe have the paintings online where people then will go view the paintings online rather than in a closed space. I don't know, it's just going to take a lot of creativity, a lot of get it done type people like Lily and Ansley and Andy from Olmsted have partnered with an online auction house, which I think is a really great thing. And they're going to be running their event through that.
Hyman Auctions, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful partnership. And another way to introduce plein air to a whole different world of collectors. Most of the people that frequent sites like that are really looking at the secondary market, and not looking at work that's just freshly created. This could be a whole new opportunity for a lot of events around the country to partner with somebody like that.
There may be some new ways of looking at this and how to carry out these events going forward in the future. Even though we won't be, the pandemic will be behind us, there may be adaptations that will help us make these even better events going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. So I think just, keeping an open mind and looking at things creatively and seeing what doors open to us following this will be key. I hope the events, the smaller events, the struggling events, don't just give up. I think they're just such a valuable thing for so many artists all over the country and all over the world, really. I mean, I've been to a couple of events, outside of the U.S. and they're cherished. They're cherished by the population and the artists that live in these areas. So let's hope that the momentum keeps going.
In addition to the plein air events, I mean, before that, really, we had the art fairs, the community art fairs. I'm amazed here in the little town that I live in, how they're supported and how they support the arts. And it is so much fun interacting with the public when you set up at those events. I'm a bit too old to do that because it's a lot of work.
It's very intensive. I've only done one like that. And my husband was in the Navy, so we traveled a lot.
Yeah.
I was a single mom a lot, so I just was never able to do that. So that's why you had a motorhome.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me.
Oh, it was. We lived roughly 2 months out of the year in the motorhome. Of course, I've done nothing like what Patrick Saunders and his wife Kimberly are doing. I just released his episode last night, and they have made for the last 5 years, that's what they've done is traveled in an Airstream. Isn't that something?
I know. And the funny thing is, after seeing him, my husband and I went out and bought a little one.
Did you really? Oh, nice.
Yeah, because I got to the point where I really, the plein air events the host families are wonderful and everything, but there's something that's much more relaxing about just going back to your own space at the end of the day of painting. So we decided that we would do something like Patrick and Kimberly, not give up our whole home, but just have, an Airstream. And there are other artists. Kathy Odom does that. And I think Beth Bath. A lot of artists are using Airstreams. Or not Airstreams, but trailers.
Yeah, yeah.
And so anyhow, we did that. And we actually did it. I was in Canada last year, and we pulled our Airstream up there. And
what part?
I was the judge last year for the Parksboro Plein Air. I had competed. It's in Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
I competed. Yeah, competed the year before, and I had won the first place. So then they invited me back last year to be the judge. Wonderful, wonderful part of the country. Really dramatic scenery and great people, and so it was just very enjoyable. Yeah, I love the motorhome life. That's what what I love about it is you get into these small spaces and you're forced to really pare down to essentials.
It's liberating.
It is very liberating and actually very relaxing. It's it's a relaxing way of living. I'm not sure I could do it 365 days a year, but when I do it, I thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah, I couldn't do it 365. That's not and now that I'm older, it's harder to set up. You know, but I do miss it sometimes. But I probably won't go back and buy another motorhome anytime soon, or a trailer. It's just, I went through that phase. I enjoyed it immensely. We made many great memories with the children. We kind of did it when we were young instead of older. Did it with the kids, and that's what we enjoyed.
Yeah, we actually did it with the kids too, but it was my parents' motorhome, so we only did a couple of trips. But we're realizing we're on the kind of the upper end of our age limit for pulling a trailer. Ours is only 19 feet, but it's getting close to being too much work.
Yeah, we're opting out to find hotwire 4-star hotels for reasonable rates when we travel now.
Yeah. I think actually my husband's ready for that.
But what I liked about it was just being able to pull over anywhere, just about. And you'd have lunch. You could go for a hike.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet it was great for your kids.
Well, it's how it was one of the keys for how I got interested in art making. I remember we camped in Jackson, Wyoming. It was the first time I ever entered into an art gallery. I'd never been to one before. Yeah. I went in and it was the most amazing. It was transformative because I had never had an interest in art like that. And I had an interest in art and artistic creative things, but I didn't have this desire to be a painter at that time.
Right.
But
you're a photographer or videographer?
I was photography and video first. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then went into a gallery, and that just changed my life. It was incredible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Two of my kids are professional photographers. And I always wondered, why didn't they become painters? But, they say that sometimes happens, that if they don't, I don't know, it may be intimidating or something, or I don't know. But
I think there's a lot for photographers to offer to painters, as well as painters to offer to photographers, because there's so much territory that we cover that are very similar, especially when you think about composition and subject matter.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And even value. Photography, value is so important in photography. So,
well, the first value system I ever heard of was Ansel Adams' zone system. That was a value system.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's a grayscale of different ranges. And of course, back then, film photography, doing the prints, you had limited dynamic range. So you were limited to about 4 or 5 zones. And so his darkroom techniques emphasize the portion of the photograph that you wanted to emphasize within those value ranges.
Huh.
So that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And so when I hear about values in painting, say, I get that. I read about that. Ansel Adams talked about that.
Yeah. So you're way ahead.
I don't. I got to make it work.
Well, we all do.
Head knowledge is not the same as heart knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a lot of different things. You organized major events. You're doing workshops. I wonder how you balance all of that out so that you can continue to create art. I know that's a challenge for me. Doing this podcast, I love doing it, but it also takes time away from when I would actually be painting. And I don't want anyone to feel bad about that. This is what I do. I choose to do it, and I hope it benefits others. But it can be a challenge to balance all of that. How do you cope with it?
I think in the last few years, I've just prioritized. There's been each thing I did was fun and exciting, but it did take me away from studio time, but it actually moved me further along in my goal toward being the best artist I can be. For a long time, I just was an artist. I was a mom with raising 3 kids, but my primary goal was just being an artist. But I've always been a people person, where I'm interested in people and I'm interested in how people work together. And when I bought this gallery, it kind of took me back to going way back. I was fine art major for the first 2 years in college, and then I got married because I wasn't seeing how I could have a career, and it just I didn't feel a strong need to get a degree in fine arts at that point. Got married, and then I finished college and as a sociology major. So then, after the few years after college, I was a social worker, so working with people and with bureaucracies, health departments and court systems and things like that. So I kind of really exercised that other part of my brain, I guess, where I was working with systems and understanding human behavior. And then I kind of started having kids, and then I just stayed home. And I was a portrait painter for a long time in the South. It was very fertile territory for doing that sort of thing. For many years, I was just a studio painter and a gallery painter. I was, at that point in, maybe 5 or 6 galleries, selling my work through galleries. And then one of the galleries I was in was here in Easton, Maryland, and the owner wanted to sell it. And it was like a perfect storm. My last child had gone off to college and feeling a little unsettled. And my husband and I were thinking, well, yeah, let's look at this. Let's check out Easton and see if we'd like to do that. And so we came over to Easton. I'd been dropping artwork off there, but it was kind of like I would drive artwork over and leave it and go away and never really, look that much at the town. We came over and started really looking at the town, and we thought, we could live here. This would be a good place to set down roots, because it's and remember, we were Navy people going from Navy base to Navy base. So when we looked at the town, we thought, well, let's give this a try. So the next thing we know, we're business owners, which we had never, other than my sole proprietary business as an artist, we had very little business knowledge. And then at the same time, I pitched the idea to the town of doing a plein air festival, because everything was happening in 2004. So right away, I went from being a studio artist to being a gallery owner to being a major a prime organizer of the major festival.
How long did you have the gallery before you did formulate the Easton event?
3 or 4 months. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, I had this title of gallery owner, which changes everything, because you're no longer an artist with your peers. You're an artist that has some power over your peers, and I didn't realize that. When I first bought the gallery, I didn't really like that role, but then. Conversely, I was also doing this organizing for my peers, and I really enjoyed that part of organizing Plein Air Easton, because I could see the advantages to the individual artist.
So you were using your power or influence for their good. That's what you mean.
I think I was. But going back to what I studied in college, I was also using my knowledge of how bureaucracies and systems work. And I anticipated the pushback we would have from the local artists and some of the local businesses. So, having a little bit of this experience in that world, and also having experience in the art world, I think my contribution was fairly valuable to Plein Air Easton. So I did that intensively. I was trying to get a gallery going successfully and getting the Plein Air event going successfully, and I did that intensively for 3 years. And then by then, Plein Air Easton was doing very well and was being run by a top-notch organization, the Avalon Foundation, and I just pulled out of that, and then put my artist hat back on and said, I'm going to start entering. And that's when I started entering competitions and being, going back to being an artist. And the gallery was doing okay by then, but then the recession hit, and then it was harder and harder with the gallery, and we ended up selling the gallery in 2016. And that just, freed me up for really, really focusing on my art. So it was kind of like I took a 10-year hiatus out of prioritizing my painting. Well, in one way, it might have stopped my progress as an artist, but during that period, I learned so much, met so many people, that by the time I went back into my studio, where my sole priority was, my art, I'd learned so much from so many other people. And of course, there's the school involved there too. I started, back with the gallery, we started hosting workshops because that was another revenue stream that allowed the gallery to keep going. But through all of that, by the time all that started winding down, I'd gained a lot.
I think those experiences, even though it may have taken away from growing as an artist for a while, it has so many benefits, the education you got from that.
Absolutely.
Let's face it, if we want to make it as an artist, and if our goal is a financial one, we have to learn how to put our works out there, how to have revenue streams that can help us support our lifestyle. All of those are good lessons to learn, and you went through that.
I did. I got like a doctorate in it.
What were you thinking?
I don't know. I've just always been a person that sees I guess the word opportunist is a negative word, but I see an opportunity, and if it looks interesting to me, I jump on it, Plein air, jumping on that plein air bandwagon, and was an opportunity that was, if we didn't take it, we were going to miss out. And so anyhow, I guess I'm flexible. Let's put it that way.
Ask you a question about the Easton experience, because you mentioned you anticipated that there would be pushback, and I was surprised to hear you say that there would be pushback from artists, and I'm curious about what kind of pushback that would have been and how it was overcome.
Well, the arts in Easton had actually been flourishing for quite a while. There's a waterfowl festival, and it had been going on for maybe 40 years by then. That was a big art festival focused on wildlife art. And there was Academy Art Museum, which had been an art center, which had become an accredited museum before I came to Easton. So, and then there were a couple of art galleries here already. So there was already an established art scene and kind of an established hierarchy of artists. So introducing the idea of this new type of painting, outdoor painting, and bringing in artists from all over the country, the powers that be could see only competition. And, you can expect that if you're comfortable and you're making a living on your art in a certain area. And why embrace this widely different type of art and all these artists it would bring in? So we had to really convince the local artists that it would enhance their own art and provide even more opportunities for them to sell. What we as a board, Plein Air Easton, one of the goals was to enhance the local art community, in addition to bringing top quality plein air artists into the area. Right away, we established a show that would be for only the artists in the surrounding 6 counties, that would run in conjunction with Plein Air Easton, or would be financed by Plein Air Easton, publicized by Plein Air Easton. So that happened. And also Plein Air Easton started doing a lot of demonstrations that were free, that would help, local artists. Just all along the way, the needs of the local artists were kept in the forefront. And I think that came from knowing, just kind of understanding how systems work. I remember having the same experience. I worked for a family planning clinic in California, and our job was to get family planning to the people that needed it, but the bureaucracy that we had to work with was the health department. who thought that they were doing that, but they weren't really to the degree that was needed. So, it's kind of the same thing. How do you make it a win-win for everybody?
That's human relations, right? It doesn't matter what field, what you're doing, whether it's the arts, the sciences.
Exactly. You don't want to hurt. You don't want to hurt people that you need, whose support you need.
Yeah, you listen to their pain, their concerns. I had the same with sales and marketing with my business. It was the same thing. You always went in with a listening ear, or I tried to. I wasn't always good at it. It took time to really learn to be empathetic to that and facilitate a solution. Because I may have a very strong opinion as to how something should work.
Exactly.
Right, and it's not necessarily right. It's just an opinion. So
it's actually one of the things that Al Bond, who is was the head of at the time Easton Main Street, who is the organization that started it. It then was taken on by the Avalon Foundation. But anyhow, Al Bond at the time went and found somebody in the community that was a professional mediator. And that person was very, very active in our early meetings, setting up our goals and our mission statement and things like that. I think that's one of the things. It was a really good, strong foundation that has helped Plein Air Easton be as successful, as it is.
They've really set the bar high for these type of events.
They have. They definitely have.
Well, let's talk about you as an artist. So you started off primarily as a portrait painter, from what I understand, and then
I always did like doing portraits. I was kind of good at it. In college that was kind of fun, but I had never thought that I was going to be a portrait painter because I didn't really understand that people were still having portraits painted. From my background, I thought portraits were all in museums and people just got photographs done. It wasn't until we were stationed in Jacksonville, Florida, that I began to realize, no, portraiture is alive and well. And then I started, it was a little show, and from there I got some commissions. I was doing my portraits for, maybe $35, $50 a head when I started down in Jacksonville. And as you can imagine, I quickly got really, really busy. And then the next thing I know, I'm a portrait artist, and I'm off in that direction. But I was never completely content to just be a portrait artist. So I was still doing other types of art. And when we got stationed up in, I don't know if we had stayed in Jacksonville, I may have very well just have been a portrait artist. But when we moved up to Washington, D.C., I had to start all over again because then I was a very small little minnow in a great big sea of very fine artists in the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C. So I went back to school and started learning more about color and teaching myself how to be a more informed colorist. And then I started doing still life. I actually spent a whole year in my studio. By then I had gotten a studio outside the home and my kids were all in school. But I spent a whole year just teaching myself color by setting up still life. And I would start off at all yellow still life and try to understand how to see the difference between the warm and cool and the highly chromatic and the grayed yellows. And, I would go from one all yellow still life to all red still life to all blue still life to all black, all white. And I spent a whole year doing that. And by then I had some nice still life. So then I got into a gallery with my still life.
From the exercises of learning.
Yes, from those exercises I had.
So this is a fascinating thought to me. So a lot of times I sit around thinking, what will I paint? What will I paint? But you were thinking, what will I learn? What will I learn?
Yes.
And that solved the problem of what you will paint.
Yes, it absolutely did. I would say I sold a great many of those still lifes because I wasn't just trying to dash them off. I was trying to truly study what I was looking at and educate my eyes. And so anyhow, then I was, and at the same time, I was entering a monthly competition at the Art League in Alexandria, Virginia. Sometimes I'd get in, a lot of times I wouldn't get in. And then once I got in with, I had done some figures on a beach. I'd seen, Don Hatfield's paintings out in California. I thought, gee, I really like those. Maybe I could expand my portraiture into figures. And so I did some, from photographs of my daughter and some friends, I did some figures on the beach, won an award, got noticed. Galleries started saying, well, we want your figures on the beach. Then I was doing figures on the beach in addition to still life and a portrait on the side. And, doing okay, doing all right. Making some money and enjoying what I was doing. And then a friend of mine said, well, why don't you come out and do some plein air landscapes with us? So I did that. And boy, that humbled me like nothing had ever humbled me.
Wait, had you done plein air before?
No.
So this was a new experience.
Yeah, I'd done landscapes from photographs because I had enough ability to be able to understand somewhat, color, value, design, and so I was doing that type of landscapes. But then she said, well, come on, I'm in this group. It was Washington Society of Landscape Painters, and we go out once a month. We paint plein air. So I started doing that, and then I kind of got hooked with that. And that was like late 90s, I think, when I joined that group. And then it was 2004. And so I was in galleries, and I was submitting landscapes. I was doing still lifes. I was doing figures. So I never really glommed in on any one thing. And I was still doing portraits when I got the commissions, but at that point I was really not pushing portraiture as much as I was doing the other themes. So by the time we bought the gallery in 2004, I was an established artist and had my work in a lot of galleries, and had fortunately not boxed myself in too much. I mean, there were favorite themes I did. By then I was also starting to do chefs, people in restaurants, and, they sold quite well in certain galleries. So, I would, at that point, I think most people would say, well, I'm a mid-career, relatively successful artist. But then when I got pulled into the plein air world, mostly by starting that plein air event and meeting all these fabulous artists from all over the country, it's easy to, the expression, it rocked my world.
Yes.
it rocked my world. And I started doubting everything I had been doing. And then I was, meeting all these other great artists and having them teach for me. And so it's like, I reached a point where my own work just kind of stalled. And it stalled for a while. And I was still selling and producing and everything, but I was kind of going through a period, well, I don't really know who I am as an artist, I can be so easily influenced by somebody else. Do I really have a strong core as an artist?
Well, how did you reset that or center it?
It was I just kept painting. Every now and then I'd hit it and, I'd love what I did. And most of the time it was kind of like, ho-hum, who does it look like today? And my daughter actually pulled me up short one day and said, Mom, that does not look like your work, and you've got to get back to who you are.
Oh, wow.
I know. This is the same daughter that made me become a painter. So I started really kind of listening to her. And this is something I tell my students nowadays, to really get to who you are as a painter. One of the really great exercises is to sit down with your stacks of art magazines and go through them quickly. And, when you see a painting that makes your heart skip a beat, tear that painting out. Don't tear out the paintings where you mentally say, oh, that's very good. Oh, I really admire that. Oh, tear out the ones that make your heart stop. And as you do that, you'll begin to realize who you are, what your real natural aesthetic is. So when I did that, I began to see that I was really an impressionist, and I really, really liked work that was not so finished, not so hard-edged. And Huang Ho's work was one that kept coming to the forefront, when I would tear out an image. Ken Oster was another one that kind of set me straight on plein air. he was a great teacher. And then Kwang Ho in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, added a little bit more to the puzzle, got me back going the way I needed to be going. And so along the way, there were some really great instructors that it was like, I needed just a little bit of a shift in my thinking. And I would say about 5 years ago, it just all seemed to come together. And it may be because I moved my studio from the gallery where I had a small space up on the second floor to where we were holding workshops, which was a large space. To back up a little bit, in 2010, another artist and I, Louis Escobedo, had decided to partner and start having workshops in this alternative space in Easton. And so for 3 years, he and I did that together. And then he decided he wanted to go out on his own. And I was left with the decision whether I wanted to keep running that space, which was fairly expensive, or just shut it up. And I decided to keep running the space, which is where Easton Studio is now, and use it as my own studio and have an occasional workshop there. So that's what I ended up doing. It was kind of going out on a limb. I wasn't sure that I could financially keep the space going, using it for myself, 90% of the time, and then have just enough workshops in there that it would keep the Easton Studio School going and also help supplement the rent. So I did that, and I think my work started changing. Having that larger space, a space that was totally private, it wasn't part of a gallery where people could stop in at any time. I keep the blinds shut. I didn't hang out
No
a sign
pressure,
or anything.
yeah.
No pressure. And so, I was there by myself, and things started happening. And I think that's when I started winning awards. And I had been getting into some national shows, but hadn't won any awards. But that's when I started winning some awards, just feeling more confident in the direction that I was heading down, which was, impressionism and more in contemporary impressionism. All right, I had another aha moment when I was sponsoring a workshop of John Redmond from Philadelphia. He was painting just a nice little still life, beautiful little simple single flower in a silver cup, and everybody was, watching the masterful way he put that still life together. And then he said, I don't think this is very interesting. And he picked up a rubber instrument, which I now know is called a potter's nib, NIB.
Okay.
It's used by potters. So he picked it up and he just dragged it down over the flower. And like he was destroying it. And everybody went, ah! And then we all kind of went, oh, it's even more interesting than it was. And so that.
How did it make it more interesting to take that and just run it through the flower?
It had more mystery, more interesting edges. It just was more interesting. And you need to study his work and maybe study some of mine now, because it was this concept of constructing and then deconstructing that I found so fascinating. And I think it's a way of working that you can't really introduce into your own work until you have the confidence that you can reconstruct. Because, deconstructing is taking something and tearing it down, and what you may end up with may not be as good as what was there. So do you have the ability to then get back to where you were?
So you can experiment.
Yeah,
more.
It's a process. So it becomes a process. And so that is what has really informed my last 5 years of work, I think. And, some days I don't have it. I'll just be working very workmanlike to construct a painting and, make sure my design's good, my drawing's good, and values and color. And the magic hasn't happened. I actually had a painting that I had in the studio for 2 years that I knew it had all the right ingredients, but it didn't have the magic. And it was one that went into my waterfowl show last year. probably the day before I framed it, I took a roller, a foam roller. I just started putting some thin paint over it, glazing. I started glazing areas with the roller. And all of a sudden it had what it needed.
Wow.
It had this feeling of atmosphere that had been lacking. And so I don't always know what it needs, but now that I've experimented with so many different tools, I can often get there.
I'm often fascinated by artists who do exactly what you do. You try new things. You try different tools. I interviewed Phil Stark. He said, he had to paint with a stick one time, and it worked.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing what you can do. The variety of marks. I think the canvas itself becomes so much more interesting when there are a variety of tools.
Yeah. Well, what about the surface itself? Do you experiment with that as well?
I do. I experiment with a variety of different surfaces. I kind of keep returning again and again to my favorite canvas, which is a Clausen's 90, I believe. It's kind of a rough universal primed. I find that the rougher canvas works better for me, but it's acrylic prime, and I find that works best for me with the different tools I'm using. But I've also painted on something called Mylar, which John Redmond uses, which is a plastic, and it's a drafting type film, and it's a heavy plastic. And I thought, that'll never work, but it was amazing how well it works and how quickly it sets up. Yet how you can go in and lift the paint off. I want to paint on it just the way it is, which is kind of like a frosted. You want a frosted Mylar. And so it sets up beautifully, and you can get all kinds of different effects on that. The only problem then comes with framing. I've found framing it a little bit difficult. But there are artists all over the country using things like that. So I think experimenting is key to growth as an artist. I scratch my head at artists that always use one set of brushes, one set of colors, and one type of support. I think that's so limiting. Now, commercially, it's probably very smart. You know what you're doing, and you get there faster, and you have a product that can be put out on the market, in less time. For me, it's a personal thing. I'm not that type of artist.
When I look at your gallery, I see a wide range of subjects, people working, people playing on the beach, people at leisure, urban scenes, landscapes, all quite beautiful. They're very, very nice. I hope one day I get to see them up close and personal, see them in real life. I think that would add an extra dimension that I'm missing right now. But,
yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. But what I want to know is, as you paint, what are you trying to convey in what you paint?
It's funny. Each subject is different. I've kind of, and Kwang Ho is a big part of this, I've kind of moved beyond subject. What I look for now is really an interesting collection of shapes. But as I'm working on it, like for instance, I did an old workboat recently. I think I posted it on Facebook. I wanted to do that painting because I like the shape. I like the shape of that workboat that was up on blocks in a yard. But then as I start, painting it and I get into it, then the story comes to mind. It is an interesting shape. I like the shapes against the other shapes. But then the fact that it's a workboat becomes important, and the story starts to build in my head. Well, somebody owned this workboat at one time, and think of all the times it went out on the water, and now here it is, and it's rotting away in the yard. And has it ever been become a workboat again? Will some prince rescue it? And that's how the title Sleeping Beauty came. So, as I'm painting it, my goal is to introduce that feeling of that boat resting in this spot where weeds are growing over it, and it's slowly disappearing into the land. But is there a moment that it's going to, stop rotting and become what it once was? I don't know. So that kind of happens to me in almost all of my paintings, but I don't really start out with the subject. I start out with what I see as an interesting collection of shape. There was another one that was called Lobster Shack Morning. That it was just, I was visiting this lobster fishing yard down in Key West and looking for a motif, not finding anything really that was turning me on until I all of a sudden saw these palm trees behind this set of lobstermen shacks. And it was the shapes that really, really got to me in that. It wasn't that I was looking to paint a lobsterman's shack. It was that I saw an interesting collection of shapes where I could see a painting. So I'd say I start with shape, and so whether a shape in a restaurant or a shape on a figure on a beach or a landscape or urban shape, it doesn't matter to me, or a still life shape. It doesn't matter to me as much as if the shapes call to me,
Well, one that really stands out in my mind with the emphasis of shape, and it's done so very beautifully and very, there's a sense of mystery to it. It's called Edge of the Village.
That's a recent one. And
the house is way up in the upper right hand. I guess it's just the outskirts of the village, and it's way up there. And I like the way that composition pushes it out of the traditional rule of thirds and all that. I mean, it's way up there, and yet it's such a beautiful painting.
That was an experiment, but I started with that bush shape. I have a photograph of that, and I thought, how can I make this work? How can I make this more than just a painting of a bush? And it actually it's a combination of photographs and plein air sketches that I took. That was a place where I taught for 3 years in France, and I would go up on that hillside and sketch and photograph, and I've kind of pushed elements together and alter them in some way. So that was how do I make these shapes work together, and in a way that's interesting and understandable. So it wasn't I set out to say I'm going to paint the edge of the village. It was I'm going to paint this bush, and how can I work with other shapes to make it all work together.
So when you started that painting, did you tone the surface or did you just start laying in the bush itself?
That's I call it my first pandemic painting, because I was looking for painting. So I'm kind of short on painting surfaces in my studio right now.
Uh-oh.
And that was it was a half attempted painting on masonite. And I got my electric sander out and I sanded it down so it was kind of toned. It was rough, but it had a tone behind it. And then I just painted over the tone. Painted it pretty quickly with a lot of palette knife and big brushes. And then, worked from that to, then the end, I was using small brushes for a lot of the detail in the foreground. That was fun. That was a really, really fun painting.
It looks like it was fun. It's one of my favorites on your website. So I'm being a fanboy. I'm being a fanboy right now, but I can do that. This is my show.
That's good, because that's one of the second to the last painting I did. So I appreciate that.
The pandemic series, I like it.
Yeah, I know. I hated first. I thought, should I call this my pandemic painting? But it is. It was forced. I probably would never have done that painting if I hadn't been in the circumstances I was in. And knowing I had all that time and all these failed canvases sitting around my studio, what can I make make with one of them.
And so now you experimented with masonite on top of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I've done that before, but I think the key to that, and I tell my students, is don't be so precious with your surface. In fact, I had a student about a month ago. She's a pretty good painter, but she worries between every stroke. She brought in a surface that had a hole in it. She said, this canvas is no good, so I'm just going to experiment over this. She did one of the best paintings she's ever done because she entered in with the I have nothing to lose attitude. And I try to teach my students to look at every painting as an exercise. And what happens is they all think this is going to be framed. I've got to make a painting that's worthy of a frame. And that's where the timidity sets in. So I'm not saying always use canvases with holes, but I think a great many of your paintings need to be done on approach in that way, on surfaces that aren't so precious, with the end goal not having a painting that's going to go into a frame or a gallery, but making that painting on that particular day an exercise that you're going to, experiment, put everything you can into it, and, you may get lucky. That was one of those experiences. It was like, I'm going to try this. Let's see where it goes.
Well, I want to go in a different direction now. And I don't know what the ethics of this is because I'm new to the art world, but I do know that you're one of the 3 award judges for the 6th annual Olmsted Plein Air Invitational. But I'm curious about the judging process. Is that something that we can talk about? Because I'm curious about what goes through your mind when you do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on judging? What do you look for when you judge, when you are asked to judge an event? When you're looking at the entries, what stands out in your mind? What are you looking for?
The first thing, most of these, it depends on whether it's a plein air competition or a competition online. They're a little bit different, but they end up with, I guess I look for the same thing. So like if I'm judging something online, I'm going through a whole lot of images very quickly. And it's the ones that look good, as thumbnails, that jump out as thumbnails that, and that, so number one, a good design, a good, strong, simple design is something I look for. So I'm looking for all, the good drawing, especially in most of the competitions I judge. There's so many good applicants that you start throwing people out where the drawing is not good. Some people think technique or color can disguise good drawing, and I totally disagree. I think you have to have, good bones to a painting. So I'm looking for a good design, good drawing, good value. To me, color is the least important thing, but I look for color that's harmonious. And then I guess the last thing is it really becomes personal at that point. But when you're choosing between so many good paintings, it's like what appeals to me. What it's kind of like going back to what makes my heart sing. If this painting has met all the criteria of the building blocks of good painting, how has that artist done something different? And it could be their technique, it could be their subject matter, it could be any number of things. But then it becomes a personal thing, and that's where when you're the only judge, then it's a real heavy responsibility.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I've never experienced anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really it's hard, and a lot of times I've said I'm never doing it again. But then I get asked, and I think, somebody has to do this because this is how we move ahead in the art world, at least in our art world, maybe not. And there are all kinds of art worlds, but in, the representational plein air world, this is how we make our careers. So I'd rather be doing it than having somebody that is just not as knowledgeable maybe doing the judging. So anyhow, getting back to it's hard when you're the only judge because there's always a lot of good paintings that could win awards and you can't give them all awards. So then it comes down to really your personal taste after they've met all the rest of the criteria. Now, judging in a group, it's going to be different because I know that Leslie is a collector and she's going to have probably a different aesthetic than I have. And I don't know the third judge. I'm sorry.
Chris Garvin.
Chris Garvin. Yeah. Leslie is a serious collector. And I think that's what Olmsted has done a little different than Plein Air Easton. Plein Air Easton always sticks with one judge, and Olmsted has always had a committee. And there's the artist, the collector, and then I thought it was like from the academia world.
Yeah, it's a good mix. Yeah.
Yeah, we all bring different perspectives. What I'm looking for may not be what Chris is looking for or what Leslie is looking for. So then I think, and I haven't received my instructions yet, but the one time I judged with a committee, we all, we gave numerical values to the paintings, and the ones with the highest, collection of numbers, the total amount, were the winners. That's how we selected the winners. And I assume it's going to be something similar to that.
Do you ever have to worry about having a tiebreaker or anything like that in something like that?
Yes. Yeah, you do. And it doesn't happen that much. I mean, what we probably we'll end up with a bunch of artists that are eligible for awards, and then we'll have to go through and judge again. And, at that point, we may assign somebody a higher number that we really think should get a top award.
Do you ever have a problem of artists trying to paint what they think you will like as opposed to just painting what they want to paint?
I think by now most artists know that doesn't work. I think I did that in the beginning too, trying to choose what I think the artist would like. And I just think that's a mistake. I think you just have to put your best work out there and not paint for the judge. Just paint what you know is your best way of painting and choose your best work. It's hard because I know so many of these artists and I know their work. So they run the risk of putting something in that may be very good work in the eyes of the other judge, but I know I've seen better from them, So then I have to search my soul and ask myself if I'm being prejudiced against their work, because in the back of my mind, I know they're capable of more. So it's a very tricky, imperfect process. It is an imperfect process, but it's the only one we have.
Yeah, and I think we can work with that. I don't think, it's just part of it is, for me, is learning, okay, how does it work?
I have one word of advice for artists. If you're requested to enter 3 slides, make sure the 3 slides look like they were all done by the same artist. I think a lot of times people will I'll enter one that I do this way and one I do this way, hoping that the judge will like, one of them. And I think it's much more important to know the judges are looking for consistency of style. They're looking for artists that know who they are as painters and have confidence in their style. Does that make sense?
So not subject matter, but the way it's painted.
Yeah. I've seen people submit a watercolor, an oil, and a pencil. So I think being consistent in your approach and the look. You want people to be able to say, "Oh, I know that was painted by Nancy Tankersly," or "I know that was painted by Carl Olson," just by the way it looks. And it's kind of hard to put words to it, but it's like your signature. If you paint enough, you develop a look that is uniquely your own.
It becomes a brand almost.
It does. And you may have little bits of other artists in your look, but the way it's all put together is uniquely your own. And that's why, you become a master after, 10,000 hours in the studio or 10,000 miles of canvas. It's because it's all just kind of come together. It's miles behind the brush, hours behind the brush, whatever. It's painting every day is probably almost every day. And even if you're not painting every day, thinking about painting every day, it will get you a long way.
Yeah, I like that because I don't get to paint every day. It's just not possible.
I don't either.
Yeah, and nor do I want to paint every single day.
No.
As much as I like.
Look out your window and think, how would I paint that?
I walk my half-acre lot. Look at my flowers that my wife and I shouldn't say my flowers, our flowers in garden, and get some ideas. In fact, I'm really struggling with it right now because it's not something I typically paint. So I got to figure, okay, how can I make this work? It's my pandemic series.
Think shape.
Shape.
I went to look at your work, and the only one I could find was the one on YouTube. You've got the old Dairy Queen or I like that a lot. I mean, that's actually kind of what I like, and when I paint buildings, kind of the old derelict. But it's also those geometric shapes, the way they fit together.
Yep. That appeals to me.
Yeah, it appeals to me a lot too. So, like when I paint a still life, I try to really distill it down to simple shapes. Try to figure out what simple shape that particular flower is, what simple shape the whole bouquet together makes. I think it's interesting. I recently I realized when I was in high school, I was terrible at algebra, but I was really good at geometry. And that's as far as I went. I didn't do any of the other higher maths, but, geometry I could ace. And I realize now that I love the underlying geometry of shapes. And if a painting has that, then it clicks with me. Even though I love brushwork, I love soft edges, I love, all the stuff that goes on top of it. It's the geometry of shapes that is so important to me in painting. Well, it's funny how these things come back to you from your early influence, and it's like, maybe that's why I was so good at geometry. You
just gave me a show title for your show.
Oh, what's that?
Geometry of shapes. It's very poetic. I like that.
Well, it's funny. The very first painting, I think it was a breakthrough painting. It was a rail yard, a bunch of old, rail cars, old tracks in Baltimore, and I painted that, and I did a lot of construction and deconstruction of that one because I'd never done a scene like that. But I ended up calling it Morning Geometry because it was all based on the geometry I was seeing in that scene. That won an honorable mention in the AIS national show, about 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. So anyhow, it was finding that geometry.
Nancy, I've learned so much in our conversation today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here in The Artful Painter.
Thank you, Carl. I've totally enjoyed it, getting to know you a bit, and hope to meet you in face-to-face someday.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll have to make that happen. And so we wrap up another edition of The Artful Painter. I really appreciate Nancy Tankersley for taking the time to talk with us. Please be sure to go check out her website. There's so many beautiful paintings out there and a lot of fine resources. She has workshops, mentoring programs, and much, much more. Go to nancytankersley.com. I have a link in the show notes. Also, I want to thank Lillian Ansley for setting up many of these interviews for me. I really appreciate it. She is the co-founder of Olson Plein Air. So please be sure to check out their website and check out how they are reimagining what a plein air event is. We have many more guests coming on the Artful Painter. I've got a bunch of episodes recorded and more scheduled in the very near future. So I look forward to releasing those as quickly as I can. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Picture on the TV.